Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Big Questions podcast, where we explore a range of perspectives on the major themes guiding the economy and markets longer term. I'm your host, John Briggs, and today we're sharing our latest episode in our series focusing on AI. Last episode was a broader table setting exercise. Today, we're going to start going a little bit deeper on our journey. And so I'm both lucky and grateful to be joined by Richard Socher and Shaun Johnson, both from AIX Ventures. AIX is a seed stage venture firm led by the world's foremost thought leaders in AI with a mission to fund generations of AI-focused entrepreneurs. And Richard and Shaun, in a bit, can expand on that as well. As for the guests themselves, in addition to his involvement in AIX, Richard is the CEO and founder of U.com, the first chat search assistant. He previously served as the chief scientist and EVP at Salesforce, where he led teams working on fundamental research, applied research, product incubation, search, customer service automation, and a cross-product ad platform for unstructured and structured data. Quite a mouthful. He is widely recognized as having brought neural networks into the field of natural language processing, has over 150,000 citations, and won awards that are really just too many to list. Apparently, he's also a big laser tag enthusiast, winning a recent award there as well. Shaun is co-founder and managing partner at AIX and was previously VP of Engineering, Product, and Design at Lilt and VP of Product and Design at NimbleRx. He completed his MBA from UC Berkeley, MSEE from Stanford, and BSEE from UTexas at Austin. His activities are very close to my heart: snowboarding, traveling, and getting as much family time as possible. And I'll venture a fourth is frequently losing to Richard at laser tag. So Richard and Shaun, welcome and thank you. I gave the quick bios, but do you want to share a bit about your backgrounds and weaving in how your careers have evolved in some ways along with the evolution in AI?
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening in. Richard, I'm originally from Germany and did my PhD at Stanford. And, that was sort of, at the time, a culmination of a lot of work and studying of linguistic computer science is what we first call it, natural language processing, statistical pattern recognition, machine learning, and eventually AI. These are all different evolutions of the same underlying goal, which for me has been for almost 2 decades now, to get computers to understand human language with essentially logic and math, which is hard because in human language, you got a couple of whippersnappers saying YOLO, and then there's a new word, and now you got to understand what that means in math, which is very strict and follows specific rules. And so it's been just a fascinating journey. I've sort of credited in 2010 to have been the first to have brought neural networks and the idea of deep learning into the application of natural language processing, thinking of words as just lists of numbers, as vectors, thinking of sentences eventually as lists of numbers too, and then really getting to the goal that I had in 2010, which is to have a single model for all of NLP. We called this DECA NLP, the decathlon of natural language processing, all possible with a single model. And so in 2018, we invented prompt engineering, which inspired a bunch of folks, including folks at OpenAI, to start work in more general purpose language models. And that's seen a lot of impact. So yeah, I've been very excited about this. I've, after my PhD, tried to make it possible for others to build their own neural networks. In my first startup, MetaMind, got acquired by Salesforce, and was fortunate enough to be able to continue doing some research and expand that also within Salesforce, where we built incredibly powerful large language models for proteins and other things, as well as having a bunch of impact on real products that are getting shipped within the Einstein sort of group at Salesforce. And through all those years, been very fortunate to have had a lot of incredible interns, employees, students that I worked with who have gone on to start their own amazing companies. And, several of those companies are now unicorns and are doing incredibly well. And that's kind of how we got more and more into investing and enjoying that, also to see more positive impact that AI can have on people, humanity as a whole, as well as the planet.
That's amazing. Shaun, how about you? And then also, as you go through some of your background, how you got connected with Richard, and maybe a bit more about AIX and, how you look at things and why.
Yeah, happy to do so. Started in electrical engineering at Stanford 23 years ago, spent time at five different venture-backed startups, deeply technical, building products, hardware products at the transistor level, software at the firmware level. Some would say switching to the dark side by going from engineering in Stanford to Berkeley business at UC Berkeley. There, spent some time in venture, ultimately went out to run EPD teams at a few different venture-backed startups, including Lilt. Um, Lilt running a 40, 50 person EPD team, partnering with research. And that's really, early 2019, I got to see how coupling an EPD team with a AI research team was driving key metrics for that business and creating competitive advantage and having us win deals that our competitors would be losing. And I just sort of stepped back and said, what's the broader implication here? And that's when I reconnected with Peter Abil. Peter is a guy that I was at Stanford with 23 years ago, and just kind of had an open dialogue with him about where AI is going. And I left the call just recognizing that he's advising and investing in so many interesting founders that he's a first call investor. And so there must be in AI this idea that you can have some of the world's top practitioners out in industry, staying at the forefront of the tech, partnering with what we'll call a headquarter team to source deals, to diligence deals, to make decisions, to support these companies. Talked to Peter, and Peter said, "You got to be Richard," and the rest is history.
It's a great story because it's a reminder that as much as we've started looking about trying to understand AI, the investing side is as young, and there's going to be so many successes, but also, so many failures. And I actually want to take it a little bit from there, which is from your approach as investors, starting with that, what is your approach, maybe starting with Richard, and like, what do you look for in a company as your, from an investment standpoint?
Yeah, it all starts with the founders, and there needs to be a combination of intellectual horsepower as well as grit and just not giving up when times are tough, which is inevitable for most companies. And so that's sort of the number one thing. And then you look at and I could go into each of these for another hour, but I'll try to keep it short. So it's founder risk slash sort of positive intellectual capabilities as well as not giving up. Then it's a founding team risk, like having dinner with folks and looking at the dynamics of the team, and are they getting along? Have they worked together in the past and still like each other and all of that? Then there's go-to-market risk, like general sort of industry risk. Sometimes there's healthcare, and in healthcare there's legal and compliance types of risks, like regulatory questions, and then you kind of look at the idea that the folks have. Does the idea make sense? Is it future leaning, future proof? Are they willing to have good conversations about their idea? And is this idea something that will benefit the world in some way, and benefit it in a way that ultimately you can run a profitable business.
Yeah, so I'll get into some more, like, I guess, deeper, more specific questions on that subject, but I do find it fascinating. You kind of start with the people side of things, because it always is, on the people side of things. Shaun, what about you? I mean, you've been doing investments longer than AIX, because AIX, I think, but correct me if I'm wrong, about 2 years old. But over that process, is there any sort of like thematic approach you have, or types of companies, or anything perhaps even just to add to what Richard was saying from your side?
Yeah, look, the business of early stage venture is the business of finding companies that will give you 1,000x return, right? That's really what we're looking for. And so that means investing at a 5, 10, $20 million valuation, and working with those founders to build long lasting iconic companies that can be worth billions of dollars. That's sort of the entire game. But as Richard calls out, it's a people business, right? It starts with the founders and then moves to the product and the market and working with the founders to find product market fit as fast as possible before you run out of capital and start having to dilute more. And so that's the game, I think, holistically. In terms of theses, like it varies a little bit from fund to fund. The size of the fund change as we grow. The market changes, and so we can talk about that more as the conversation evolves.
Yeah, and I spent a little time looking at the portfolio of investments on your website, and there's a lot of different types of companies in different industries and doing different things. So with that as a preface, and meaning like you're not just narrowing in on certain category like healthcare or finance or things, so there's a wide variety. So I preface that because my question is, so when you look at these investments, hopefully I'll express this right, you have to have a view on where the impact of those companies using AI could be greatest, but thinking about it both in time and a level of impact, because there's not necessarily always the same. In other words, there's situations where AI could have an immediate impact, but only move the needle a little. That doesn't mean it's not worth it. Or there's probably areas where AI can have a major transformative impact, but needs time to mature. So, and the reason I lay it out like that is because if you're thinking of a C-suite executive that might be listening to this podcast and is trying to get their hands around just the concept of AI, but then how they should look at it. And to many of them, AI is both an opportunity, but also a potential threat, right? So the question after all of that is, what do you think of as like the more immediate impacts on businesses from AI, not the 5 to 10 year things, but some of the more things either people could more quickly think about embracing, or are threats that could evolve more quickly. And again, thinking more broadly, not necessarily like if you're a bank or if you're a healthcare company or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll start, but jamming a little bit with you on the first aspect of your question, which is, as a researcher, if you're very early, but right eventually, you're seen as very prophetic and very smart and seeing the future and being a visionary. If you're a startup founder and you're too early, but eventually right too, your company's just dead. So you do need to time it right, and you can't be too far out in a startup. And so I think for immediate impact, each founder and C-level executive needs to identify whether they are in a bucket 1 or bucket 2 of the following kind. Bucket 1 is AI is just going to increase efficiencies in your business in all aspects. You look at your P&L sheet, like marketing, sales, service, accounting, and so on. And Shaun can kind of talk more about a lot of these like examples and some companies we're seeing in each of them. But each company that embraces AI will have more cheaper and faster service, for instance, and answering questions for their customers and stuff like that. Or you're in the second bucket, which is AI will fundamentally in the next 3 to 5 years change your industry. In 2020, I anticipated that the search engine market is going to massively change because 2 years before we invented prompt engineering. There's a lot of things you can do with natural language and summarizing content for people, so you can save a lot of time. Why go through a list of 10 links, open 10 tabs if the AI can do that and then give you the best content summary for that based on who you are and all of that. So I think there's a lot of sort of big changes coming to some industries. If you're in the car, and mobility space, certainly you're going to want to think about self-driving, probably self-flying in the coming years. Like I personally prefer my Tesla because half of the commute to up to San Francisco, I could have it self-drive, right? And that's an hour of for one back and forth trip that I get back. And so if you're in service and you're selling per seat per person licenses for service employees, that's going to change a lot. And in the future, if you're a service person and you answer a question more than a dozen or 2 dozen times, you're like, why hasn't the AI taken that over yet? That's what people are going to think. So some industries are going to see massive disruption. If you're in that, you really need to lean in. Otherwise, you will get disrupted. And happy to jump into different ones, anything from tractors to service workers, like we're going to see a lot of changes and big changes in some industries.
Yeah, and I think about the efficiency side of things, and also as a strategist who's trying to predict what happens in markets and economics and things like that, thinking about how, even for myself, how do I adapt to be a pseudo prompt engineer rather than just figuring out or employing people doing things to do that research myself, and how to even an old dog like myself has to reconsider some of these things. But Shaun, when think about what Richard said, like what verticals, again, if you're an executive thinking to either use AI or protect yourself from AI over the medium term, like what verticals do you think are the most easily adaptable? Like what's an easy one to look at first within a business or on a balance sheet?
Yeah, I think there's two things to think about before getting to the vertical question. So the first is how fast or slow your enterprise wants to make technology adoption decisions. We talk to enterprise leaders that have already deployed many different AI tools across their organization. We talk to others who tell their employees that pretend AI hasn't happened. We are going to figure it out first, and then we will tell you when we're ready and what that means. And the second piece of it is the technology itself. So I think when OpenAI launched ChatGPT, there's a lot of confusion, right? The world sort of thought this is AI, right? Like this little prompt is going to just tell you like this is everything that AI has ever been. And that's just not true, right? It's this technology, other technologies like U.com, Perplexity, lots of different early AI search engines can give you very quick information. And though we've seen this technology be used across the enterprise very quickly for those early adopters, but what's taking more time is AI native applications. So it's probably the case where a prompt isn't always going to be the AI interface. It may be an accounting tool that you can speak to it via prompt, but it's doing other things like generative. Maybe it's recognizing errors that are commonly made and communicating with you about those or automatically fixing them. And those AI native applications are going to take more time to build. And so I think what you've seen is like a very easy UI being built to adopt the tech, but then what you're going to start seeing is much more AI native applications that have a whole UI layer that are just different. And one area that Richard and I have been looking at as an example is CAD tools. I don't know if you've seen CAD recently, but those interfaces are pretty cumbersome, right? And different menus, all sorts of different toolbars and toolkits. This is a place where AI can really maximize efficiency there for that to get a product to market quicker, for that CAD engineer. So, coming down to your question, then where do we see, what verticals do we see AI being used for in the enterprise? There's at the application layer, I would say there's two categories. The first is we see AI being used to fundamentally enhance the product that's being produced. So for example, if you're a CPG company, I was talking to one just recently, they want AI to help brainstorm what products they should be creating and helping to generate everything they need to get that product to market in 4 months, not 18 months, right? That's kind of one side of it. Then the other side of it is, every company is doing sales and marketing and accounting and finance and, across engineering, right? Across all of these verticals, you're seeing not only tools, but adoption. We've seen significant adoption on the engineering side. It's not a surprise. Engineers tend to be technical. Technical people want to learn more about AI as fast as possible, and using a co-pilot to write code or assist you in writing code is very natural adoption. But we're also seeing it in legal tech, summarizing contracts, reducing fees in legal. We're seeing it in tax, audit. It's there. I think the question maybe we're all asking is, where are we not seeing it yet? And those are the applications that are maybe can be non-consensus or contrarian because it's taking a little longer for the entrepreneurs to build there.
We're going to come back to a couple of things you talked about when thinking about actually some of the risks people might be worried about. But before that, Richard, and then Shaun, jump in. But when thinking of either a partner or a threat, do you think that it's going to be the big firms with the huge resources, we all know them, out in your West Coast neck of the woods, that are going to be the movers and shakers, or is it going to be smaller firms that then may or may not just be absorbed by the larger tech giants? Like, in other words, the big ones with the resources or the fast-moving, innovative ones, or both?
Yeah, the answer is complicated. It highly depends. I think as a big firm, not everything is maybe relevant to you if it doesn't make a ton of money yet, right? You need to have billions and billions of dollars to move the needle for some very large firms. Whereas, if you make $20 or $50 million in a startup, that's amazing. And so we're going to see, I think, this shake out in various different industries. Now, of course, it helps to have data, right? And the bigger you are, the more data you have. And that helps the economies that have big companies, and it hurts some economies that are more based on SMBs. They're just less well positioned. Now, at the same time, you have what's called foundational models, where you can actually take a lot of unsupervised data and you can get to an 80% solution very quickly. You think about large language models that can be trained on all of the internet. So you can get to something that is decent, and then you fine tune it with a lot less data than you used to need to train AI models. So, and open source is improving that a lot too. So we do see small companies being able to build very unique and useful models. You can think about Midjourney, for instance. I mean, they didn't even raise a bunch of venture capital, yet they're able to build a very useful AI model that generates photorealistic images. And it's one of those interesting exponential improvements that's already flattened out now, because where do you go with, from hyper-realistic photos that you can already generate? But yeah, we do continuously see, of course, a lot of startups that build unique data sets in their niche, that have unique insights, that build useful models, and it can move very quickly and capitalize on a changing landscape.
The reason why I ask that is because, and this is my next question, which I'll point to you, Shaun, which is, so, you're an enterprise. Clearly, we need to do something here, right? We have to come up with an AI strategy and implement it. Do I partner? Do I build? Do I buy? Obviously, it's going to be more complicated. It depends on your industry. We get that. But is there a trend that you tend to see?
I think what CIOs and CTOs are asking themselves now is the question, how effectively can I build a superior machine learning team? And what we hear is these executives are either deciding, yes, I can, and they're starting to build those teams or add to existing teams, or they're saying, no, we can't, right? Maybe they have some team, but they're, to really be competitive, they're going to have to buy. And I've sort of just distilled it down to brand equity, right? Do you have the brand equity in your enterprise to attract some of the best machine learning engineers? And if you do, great. And if you don't, you're going to need to buy. You're going to need to go through an M&A process, acqui-hire, different form of buying. But you're probably not going to just be able to compete with other more bleeding edge brands.
Okay, so lots of opportunities we've gone through. I want to shift gears a little bit, because obviously making these decisions, there's a lot about risk management and the risks that are involved. And as usual in the media, all the negative stories tend to get much more play and airtime and airwaves than the positive ones. So we're not here to spill myths, but something did catch my eye a little bit, which forgive both the listeners and you for the patience here, but it goes beyond just data privacy, deep fakes, which are obviously still a concern. But there was this passage in a New York Times article I read, and I'm just going to quote it here. It goes, Dozens of independent and open source AI chatbots and tools have been released in the past several months, including Open Assistant, Falcon, Hugging Face, a large repository of open source AI, hosts more than 240,000 open source models. And they quote Mr. Hartford, who's the creator of Wizard LM Uncensored, and said, "This is going to happen the same way the printing press was going to be released and the car was going to be invented. Nobody could have stopped it. Maybe you could have pushed it off for a decade or two, but you can't stop it. Nobody can stop it." So here's the heart of what I'm going to get at, which is that the concluding paragraph is that Mr. Hartford began working on Wizard LM Uncensored after Microsoft laid him off. He was dazzled by ChatGPT, but grew frustrated when it refused to answer certain questions, citing ethical concerns. So in May, he released Wizard LM Uncensored, a version of Wizard LM that was retrained to counteract its moderation layer. It's capable of giving instructions on harming others and describing violent scenes. So with that context, where and how should the line be drawn? And who is going to do that? And can regulators control this?
It's sort of, there's a lot of things a lot of directions you can answer this. I'll just talk a little bit about open source versus, only a few companies should have access to this. I do think open source has helped, open standards have helped massively in the proliferation of technology and AI. Like the fact that at some point you could, anyone can have a book. It's just helpful, right? And yes, it has changed certain dynamics and cultural movements and has supported democracy by having more people who are literate. So books were scary for a while, the internet was scary for a while, computers are scary for a while, and AI will be scary for a while. But in each case, I think ultimately the world has and people have been able to spend more time doing more interesting things, communicating more efficiently with one another. And ultimately AI kind of puts a mirror in front of us of like, this is who you are. This is the training data you're giving models to train. These are the systems that you're employing and that you're making more efficient. Do you want to make the system more efficient? Is it a good and fair system? And so I think open source helps everyone understand the technology better, be able to build on top of it. It will help smaller companies grow and build amazing things. It'll help other countries that don't have the ability or don't have massive, large, multi-billion-dollar startup VC ecosystems to also participate in that exciting future of AI. So ultimately, I think we're very far away from self-conscious AI that will just destroy humanity. And I think there's like a certain hype around that that is mostly self-serving. I think a lot of folks that would like to regulate it more are the ones who sit on billions of dollars and hence would like to pull up the ladder. I think that also doesn't make sense. I think as with a lot of technology, especially when it comes to AI, we're going to get used to it. People are going to get used to it very quickly, right? It used to be that you couldn't talk to a computer at all in natural, like spoken language. Now you just assume that usually works. Used to be that playing chess was like the pinnacle of AI. Now it's just a little app on your phone. Who cares? And so soon you're going to write an essay, and we're like, of course it's going to write that essay. And it's just like, I need to check, and will it write the essay exactly in my vibe and my style, and will it be really gripping and convince people of my argument and so on. There's people will adapt fairly quickly, and it is going to be an incredible tool, and it will make every job more efficient. But you don't have to think about the black and white and so on to be extremely excited about the colors that mix into the actual realistic gray between those crass scenarios.
I find the mirror analogy fascinating, whether that's a mirror of yourself, the user, or a mirror of society, right? Is it really actually on the technology itself, or is the technology just an expression of where society is? That feels really deep for this conversation. So neither of you have to answer that, but it's really thought-provoking on that side of things. Okay, so away from that angle, just more broadly, people need to have trust in a product. And again, things are going to get overblown and, Terminators and all that other stuff. But, there are stories about, and I'm thinking not just trust the product, but trust in the effectiveness, right? Stories about legal briefs with false citations, et cetera. And Shaun, you were introduced with the term of hallucination. So can you describe what that is, and then how that can potentially be eliminated from the process so that people, and again, to Richard's point, this is going to be a learning process for everybody. But, how do we handle that after you define it?
I'm going to let Richard, he defines hallucination extremely eloquently given his background, so I'll defer to him, and then I'll jump in after.
So just LM hallucinations and why and how. So, ultimately, large language models are trained to predict the next word very accurately. And they don't really know always what the full context is. And so on some level, so just to give you intuitively like an idea, why is that so amazing to predict the next word? It's been a task, language modeling has been a task in NLP for many years. And initially, it was just to help you, if you try to say, I would like to know the price of wood, you have two woods in there and you need to understand which wood is it? Is it the, tree wood or the auxiliary verb of wood? And so you basically would help you differentiate. It would help you differentiate. But eventually you could, realize you can sample from these models and you can generate, what do you think the next word should be? And then as you train these models with more and more data, they start to produce more and more realistic sentences. And the most fascinating thing is that with this very simple idea of predicting the next word, if you have enough parameters to really do that well, you start to learn a lot about the world. Like you can say, you have some sentence on the internet, I was in New York and then I was driving north to, right? And each word you're trying to predict, and when you try to predict the word after to, you now need to know a little bit of geography, right? And to improve the probability that this next word is maybe Yale and Boston and not Buenos Aires, right? You needed to learn about geography. And so world knowledge is getting infused in these models through that simple goal of predicting the next word very accurately. And what that also means, though, is that you might be in the context of, I want to create a science fiction story. And so I ask, what happened after aliens invaded Berlin in 2023? And it writes you a cool short story about how aliens invaded. But then you ask like some person who might think about conspiracy theories and all the politicians are lizard people and whatnot. You might be like, tell me what happened when aliens invaded Berlin in 2020, and that's it. And then they're like, the lizard people invaded and they're manipulating everyone and blah blah. And it's like the AI doesn't know like what you want, right? And so it will just generate a reasonable next couple of sentences for that prompt. And if you talk about, how conscious are you? What do you think about consciousness? It will like look at all the conversations online about consciousness and people talking back and forth about consciousness. And then it will say like, well, I'm conscious. How are you not conscious? Because no human in the training data said like, no, I'm a robot, I'm not conscious. So you then have to basically modify these models and say also make an interesting conversation. And before you know it, people kind of start using these in more and more use cases. And at U.com, and I'll try to wrap it up there, at U.com, we noticed a lot of these problems of hallucinations. And so what we said is, instead of just letting the model kind of randomly ramble, we infuse the prompt, the inputs to this model with information from the internet. And we had this idea in late 2022, and it led to what is called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. And we're the first consumer product where you can really chat with such a language model, but it pulls in facts from the internet, and then it gives you citations for those. And that allows these models to be much more factually accurate, allows them to be up to date, and it allows them to give you citations for facts. And that makes them much more trustworthy. And you want to make sure the citations are really right. Some people kind of fake citations too, and then you think it's right, but then there's not really a true citation of the facts that are mentioned. So I think there's a lot that we've been able to do to take LLM technology, large language models, and then improve it with retrieval augmentation, with multimodal outputs. So if you ask for stock price, you get a stock ticker. And the last one we actually just launched last week is that if you ask a mathematical or science or logic or statistics kinds of question to the LLM, it will not just pretend to do the math, but it'll actually code in programming language, in Python. It will code for you, run that code, and then answer your question. And that is another level of how you can use that technology to answer questions much more accurately.
So I will add a bit that I was in New York last week giving on a panel for one of our limited partners. And, my view is that we're all parents. Now, some of us are parents to human beings, and we watch them grow through their different stages. I have a 2-year-old, and sometimes I ask him questions he understands and he gives me the right answer. And sometimes he doesn't understand and he hallucinates. Now, the reality is we're all parents to machines, right? Machine intelligence is at a place where it can understand natural language and can generate some create some copy or images, but it errors, right? And we're teaching it by providing it feedback on what's right and what's wrong, and it gets better. And we're all doing it, right? If you're seeing a legal document that has the incorrect citation, like somewhere there's an entry point where you can provide some feedback and tell it the right thing to do, right? And it will learn, and it takes time. And I think Richard's examples are of a very astute parent, much closer to the machine, that does things like RAG, retrieval augmented generation, as he said, to improve the capabilities of that machine. But at the end of the day, we're all parents to machines at this point, and are providing feedback to make them better almost every time we interact with the device.
So would you agree that if, a belief that, if you're a company, say, and you adopt these methodologies and you have say a closed off data set because of privacy concerns or whatever, that, it is a risk that if you don't pay enough attention to it, if you don't have the expertise that continues to follow it, you can almost self-reinforce errors, in that way?
I think it depends. It depends on the application. It depends on the model. It depends on what you're trying to do. So I think you can set up fairly foolproof ways to make this successful. And I think you can set up more advanced ways where you're going to need more monitoring and more sophistication on your side. So it really just depends.
Okay. All right. So my last question, I think, could probably be its own podcast. So try to think of maybe the one or two things that you're quite excited about, but what are the things that each of you are most excited about looking out the next half decade to a decade? Shaun? Tough one, I know. There's probably so much.
I think that prior to middle of last year, I think people were generally excited that we've seen the internet as a major technology. We've seen mobile, and I don't think people would have anticipated we're now seeing what we're seeing in AI, and what we're going to see in the next 5 or 10 years. Some of us can't even fathom, and so it's a really exciting time, even more so to be alive. And everyone's talking about getting to AGI. Now, some people will say that's 5 years. Some people will say it's 25 years. Richard can chime in on what he thinks there as well. But just being able to see this from this evolution from a sort of a driver's seat, at least when it comes to financing and being close to these founders, is a marvel, and I think is going to be a journey.
Yeah, I'd be a fool not to mention that I think search and how we access information, how we learn things online, is going to massively change. In last year and the years before, when we introduced something to a search engine that felt a little too different to Google, we got the feedback often, I like it, but I'm just so used to Google. I can't think of any other way. It should look very much like it. Somehow ChatGPT was able to unlock that. And people now realize, wait, you can actually have a very different experience, and it can be better than Google. And that is very exciting. On a very different front, I'm very excited about large language models applied to proteins and the language of proteins. That will change all of medicine, how we can deal with viruses, how we can deal with genetic diseases, and a lot of other problems in medicine. And so I'm truly excited about the potential of LLMs for proteins.
That's amazing. Well, look, thank you both. That was incredibly insightful. And as I continue to delve deeper into this subject, I recognize not only how much there is to explore now, but just how big the possibilities, really are going forward. And again, you've really helped us kind of get into how companies, CEOs, or even anybody should start thinking about this and adapting it. But even that's probably just scratching the surface. But so I do appreciate that there's a lot more we could go into. But more than anything, I want to thank you for joining me for even just this slight deeper delve than we've done before. So thank you both. And for our audience, of course, always thanks for listening. Be sure to follow us on social media to get other episodes in the series the moment they're published. If you like what you heard today, hit that like button so it's easier for others to find. Thank you, and we'll talk to you next time.